We can go ahead and get started. So this is the second session of our training series. At our first session, we reviewed budgeting, how to allocate funds, how to approve funds. We reviewed how to set up an employer of record. We went through the paperwork that is entailed there. And we reviewed how to enroll a new participant in PPL PDP. So can someone just unmute and confirm you can see the slide on my screen?
Looks good.
Yeah. All right. Fantastic. So the agenda looks a bit long. I'm not sure how much time this will take. I think it depends on questions that come in, but I think we may have a bit more time at the end for conversation and questions. I'll do a quick refresher on what we covered last time. Try and keep that just to 2 or 3 minutes. I alluded to the service matrix at our last meeting, and I felt it would be important to bring that up just to make sure everyone is familiar with it. I'm sure most of you already are, so hopefully that won't take more than 3 or 4 minutes. We can talk about payroll info. So really the most important thing is getting funds out to our workers on behalf of the services they provide. So quick detail a bit on how and when we process payroll. And then we can kind of get into the regularly scheduled topics for the meeting. So how do I create a new vendor? How do I submit an invoice, either paper or electronic, on their behalf, on behalf of a participant in your caseload? We'll review the electronic timesheet function, so how a direct service worker or provider would log into our system and submit their timesheet electronically every 2 weeks, and then how the participant or employer would go ahead and approve that electronically as well. So really encourage that electronic method of time submission. If you or your constituents are not using that yet, I really recommend getting that set up. We have a mobile app. It's called Time for Care. It's essentially an app that allows you to submit time on your phone. Again, most folks have phones. More individuals have smartphones than they do computers. So that mobile app, I think, will be increasingly popular as the next few months go forward. And the last 2 items are really tailored to you all as brokers, area office directors, service coordinators. So how can I make sure that timesheets and invoices are going out in a timely manner for individuals in my caseload? Where can I view that in our web portal? And then the PEND report. I'm hoping all of you have either heard of this mystical report or you interact and utilize it on a daily basis. But we can review what that looks like, what the benefits are to you, how to run it, and then how to problem solve. So I'll go through the quick refresher and then I'll pause so you all can catch your breath from all the excitement. So you saw this slide at our first meeting. It really outlines the functions that you are able to perform in our web portal. That's really where you are going to be spending most of your time as you interact with PPL. Again, you have the ability to check on your participants' enrollment status, whether a new participant is good to go, whether their providers are good to go. You can see each individual aspect of what goes into making someone good to go. So as we talked about last time, if a participant is going to be hiring employees, they need an employer of record packet. We got some music in the background. If you don't mind muting yourself, that would be fantastic. All right. Sorry about that. Again, you can view participant budgets, the enrollment history. So if someone changes waivers in the middle of a fiscal year, you'll be able to see the date that change came over. And really what we're going to be focusing on this meeting are these 2. All right. Are these 2 items right here. So how do you view timesheets? How do you submit and view past invoices or reimbursements? whether that be on behalf of the participant themselves or if it's being paid to a vendor, such as Home Depot, eSpecial Needs, anything of the like. And again, these bottom two here as well. So Portal is integrated with our mobile app that I just referenced. So essentially, any time that's entered into the mobile app will show up just as if you entered it into Portal online and vice versa. And then, as I alluded to, the Pen report, we'll go through that. So again, the portal is really where you're going to be engaging on a regular basis with PPL and monitoring your caseload. Quickly, I only included this slide from our last presentation because enrolling a new participant seems to be really kind of the most important piece here to start, right? So when you're enrolling someone, they're interested in self-direction, you're going to do that in Meditech. That is automatically going to come over into our portal the next day. And so as long as you enrolled them correctly in Meditech, you'll be able to search for that new participant the following day in our portal. I won't necessarily get back into the budgets. I think we went into some detail there last time. So just a refresher, as basic as you can get when you're trying to enroll someone new. Again, do that in Meditech. Do not do it in the portal. And again, any changes to demographic info, do that in Meditech as well. Anything you change in portal with regards to the participant's name, address, social, anything like that is going to be overridden every night. All right. So the PDP service matrix. I hope most, if not all of you, recognize what's up on the screen right now. This is essentially a list of all services that are available through the PDP program. And so depending on an individual's specific needs, any number of these services can be authorized in the participant budget. And so you really want to keep a copy of this document handy. If you don't have one, please ask your regional manager. I'm sure they can provide you one. This, again, these codes up on the screen right now are what we call waiver codes, or for the most part, timesheet codes are at the top half here. And so on this document, and there's a bottom piece to this, I'll get to that in a second, but this shows you the service title, the associated service code for PDP. I know these may be different for traditional agency services, and so when you're referring someone to PPL's full-on self-direction, these are the codes that that you'll want to reference here. The unit is how a payment is to be submitted to us. So you can see the submission column here. That really relates to the unit column. So if you're submitting an hourly service, like adult companionship, individualized day support, you're going to submit a timesheet and you're going to fill in the hours that the provider worked. If you have a day service, you get a flat rate regardless of the number of hours you work in a day. And so that's also submitted via timesheet or automatic payment. These non-staff supports here, you can see most of them are listed as unit. And so that, another word for unit and how I like to think about it is really dollars. And so if you're submitting an invoice, you can see here for goods and services under code 5728, you're not going to be submitting a timesheet to us that indicates 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. was worked. That's not the nature of the service. And so you're going to be submitting an invoice for a number of dollars for that service code. And we will get into both methods throughout this presentation. So how do you all submit invoices on behalf of agencies, vendors, and participants? That really falls on you, versus timesheets. So those hourly services, how does an employee, how does an independent contractor, how does an agency go in, submit their hours to us electronically, and then how does the participant or employer approve those? So again, unit hour usually corresponds with timesheet. Unit of unit usually corresponds to some type of invoice. So this is the bottom half of that service matrix I referenced. These are strictly invoice codes. And so the flex funding, non-waiver reimbursable items, all these service codes are to be paid to either a vendor or a reimbursement to the participant themselves. And so you can see codes listed below are all vendor W-9 or unit reimbursements. And how I like to split it up is anything under this non-waiver reimbursable section, you really only need a W-9 to get a vendor up and running. Or if it's a reimbursement to the participant, you don't even need a W-9. You just need to set them up with a profile in the web portal. And we'll talk about how you do that in a moment. This is the second half of the non-waiver code section. So again, if you're submitting for any of these codes, they're not hourly, they're unit or dollar based. You're going to be submitting an invoice either electronically or via paper for these specific service codes. One more slide, then I'll give it a break. So we just talked about invoicing and payments. We talked about each of the specific service codes, right? Again, this is relatively rudimentary info, but I thought it beneficial to review. So PPL runs payroll. So for every good to pay timesheet or invoice every other Friday on cycle. It's a somewhat misleading term because as most of you know, we run payroll every week. So the term on cycle is really antiquated. We run payroll every week for any good to pay timesheets that have come in over the course of the previous 7 days. We have a payment schedule, on our website that you can refer to for exact dates. So the rest of this slide is talking broad strokes about how someone would go about getting paid. So if I'm a direct support provider, I'm providing individualized day supports for Sally. How do I go about logging my time and making sure I get paid? And so if you review back to this top section where the hourly services are listed, again, timesheets. Providers complete a biweekly timesheet indicating the time worked each day. You can do a paper, you can submit it electronically through BetterOnline web portal, or you can submit it through the Time for Care mobile app. So for hourly services, providers submit a timesheet indicating the number of hours worked on each day. For invoices, that falls on you all. So we do not accept invoices sent in by individuals or vendors any longer. Everything needs to come from DDS in order to get an invoice payment out the door. And so you have two different methods to submit your invoices. One is electronically through e-invoice, and that's also located in the portal. We'll walk through how to do that. Secondly is a paper invoice form. If you'll recall, I recommended using electronic invoice. However, there is a scenario where you need to use a paper invoice, and I'll get into the differentiation in a slide or two. New requirement, I believe over the past year, although time is kind of blurring together, a DDS cover sheet is required with every invoice request. And so previously, you just had to submit the invoice form, sign it, and then if receipts were included, send those along. Now, to ensure that only DDS staff are sending invoices over, a cover sheet's required. And again, if you submit invoices with any regularity, you should be familiar with that form. If not, reach out to your manager. I'm going to pause for a moment. Any questions so far?
Hi, I'm not sure if you had mentioned this, but are you going to be sending these PowerPoint things to us?
Yes, and I You know what? I sent them to the managers only an hour and a half before this presentation. So I am going to actually include them in the chat right now. So anyone who didn't receive these, I'm going to throw them in the chat now. So just give me
Thank you.
one.
I might have just missed it, but thanks.
Yep, no problem. All right, so the PowerPoint is now in the chat. It's sending, so it should be there any moment. So if you didn't receive it, check your email or just open it from the chat. I would just give it a minute or two more. Okay, let's move on. So now I'm going to switch over to Portal to actually demonstrate what's being reviewed in the slide deck. So similar to what we did last time, feel free if you have two screens, follow along with the PowerPoint on one, and you can watch my screen on the other. If you only have one screen, I recommend watching me, but certainly would not take offense. Okay, so for those following along in the slide deck, we are on slide 11. It's the electronic invoice submission divider slide. Okay, so moving on to slide 13, it's titled New Vendor Creation. So at the third iteration of this training series, we're going to review in greater detail how you set up a new provider, whether that be an employee, independent contractor, agency, or participant, and then what all the required paperwork looks like. And so that's going to be happening at our next training. For the purposes of what we're reviewing now, I'm strictly going to show you how to create a new vendor in our system for only invoice reimbursements. And so just to be clear, for those timesheet services, you're going to need to create an agency, an employee, or independent contractor. Far more paperwork is required when you're setting someone up for a service or a service that requires credentialing. If you're only setting a provider up to receive reimbursements, and again, the bottom half of that service matrix form, it's a much more straightforward process, and that's what I'll be reviewing now. So we're going to go ahead and log into Portal. I'll log in as a support broker. Jess, as you know, I'm using you again. Thank you very much. And so let's reset here. You've identified that an individual in your caseload requires some type of good or service. And so whether that's an electronic learning item, whether that's a fence, you've identified that they need some kind of good or service. Now, you've determined that Home Depot in Tewksbury is going to be where you purchased the good from. You need to get Home Depot of Tewksbury set up in our system so that they can be paid, right? We have no way to know how to send a check to Home Depot of Tewksbury. We have no way to validate that the payment should be going there unless you set up a profile in our system. Okay, and the way you're going to do that is click Provider Search. You're going to click Add New Provider. And this is the way you're going to add any provider type, but again, specifically for this conversation, we're looking into creating a new vendor for a good or service or reimbursement. And so you're going to want to set them up as either an independent contractor or agency. Managers, how have you been advising the field to set these types of providers up? Have you been advising independent contractor or agency?
Usually independent contractor, but like if it was a YMCA or something like that, we probably would go with agency as a vendor.
Okay. All right. So just to reset, agency and independent contractor, you can create the provider type as either one of these. So like Pam mentioned, if it's like a Home Depot, a larger agency, go ahead and set them up as agency. If it's a parent or someone of the like, that's not an agency, but they're going to be paying for or receiving the reimbursement on the participant's behalf, you can set them up as an independent contractor.
Correct. That's what we do.
Okay, perfect. So the paperwork is the same to get an invoice payment out the door. So either one here is fine. The third option is participant. So I know this is a bit counterintuitive, naming participant as a provider type, but if you have an individual, if you have a participant in your caseload who is going to be paying for a good or item out of pocket, or if we need to advance them funds to purchase something, you also need to set that participant up as a provider. And so you'll see as we go through the timesheet and invoice forms, every single payment that goes out the door requires a provider and a participant ID. Without both of those pieces of information, we don't know, one, who to take the money out of, which participant's budget, and number two, we need the provider profile to know where to send the check or payment. And so, again, I want to make this clear. This is an important point. If you're setting a provider up to receive a reimbursement or vendor payment via an invoice, you're going to set them up as an agency or independent contractor. If the participant themselves will be receiving the funds, you're going to set up a new profile using the participant provider type. So for the purposes of invoice submission, I'm going to choose agency. I'll just create a test profile. That was terrible spelling. And you can put the contact name in there if you'd like. But again, some fields are optional, some fields are required. Anything that doesn't have optional next to it is required. Address. All right. TIN. So every agency has a tax ID number. And so for larger agencies, again, I'll go back to the Home Depot well. Most of those larger agencies, you can Google what their tax ID number is fairly easily and just enter it in here. Or if you're in communication with them, you can just simply ask them for a copy of their W-9 or what their tax ID number is. Think of the tax ID for agencies as you would Social Security number for employees or independent contractors providing hourly services. So this is a key field. This is what we use to generate tax documents at the end of the year. All right. One note here. You see this stop mailing remittance advice field? It automatically populates to yes when you create a new provider. What this means is that the agency or provider will not receive a paper mailing of their pay stub. They can just access it through BetterOnline Portal at any time. So we are moving towards Go Green, and so I'd recommend paying attention to this field, making sure yes is selected if there's no need for paper remittance advice to be sent out. Again, any provider, whether it's an employee, independent contractor, can access their pay stubs through BetterOnline at any time.
Eric, can you just mention if it's an independent contractor for a parent reimbursement, that would be their Social Security number? Is that correct, instead of a TIN?
Yep, that's correct, Pam. And so if you select independent contractor here from the provider type, this field will read SSN, I believe, but if it stays TIN, you just put in the social security number. All right. The second screen in the provider profile is where you select the services that will be billed for. And so, again, for vendors receiving only reimbursements, you're going to be selecting something from the 5300 or 5400 section. So if you're going to be submitting an invoice for furniture, you're just going to select this check mark right here. That indicates that the provider is available to receive this service. All right, you can select more than one if you'd like. Go ahead to the bottom and click next when you're all set. Since you're creating a whole new provider, this checklist page is going to be blank. For an existing provider, you'll be able to see whether we received a W-9 or not right here. And I'll show you what that looks like coming up. All right, and so we're at the print form screen. We are now on slide 16, okay? So if you look at slide 16, it says all that's required for vendor payments is a W-9 to be submitted to PPL. And so you do not need to print out all of these required print forms. These are only required if you're setting up an agency to provide hourly services, which I'm not sure how often we do anymore. So all you're going to need to do is print out the IRS W-9 form, have that signed, and send it into us. Click Submit. This is the provider ID. You're going to want to remember this. It's fairly easy to search through Portal, but I recommend writing it down just initially. All right, so that provider has now been created in our system and available to submit invoices on behalf of. I'm going to recap what I just went over quickly. All right. So the first time you're going to be submitting an invoice on behalf of a new vendor, you have to register them in Portal. You have to create a BetterOnline profile, which we just did, and a W-9 is required. W-9s can be printed through that portal page, as I just demonstrated. That's the recommended method to obtain one. Blank W-9s are also located on publicpartnerships.com under the individual forms section. So if you want a blank W-9, you can go here. But again, the recommended route is to print it out through Portal, as we just discussed. I'm going to go through this next topic because I think it kind of closes the loop on that conversation, and then I'll take a break and open it up to questions. So you've gone ahead, you've created the new vendor profile in Portal. That's a big step. You have a W-9, you filled it out, you're all ready to return it to PPL. This slide here outlines how you can send documents over to us. And so if you have a W-9 ready, you can use one of these 4 methods outlined here. When we get to paper invoices, you can also send paper invoices to us via one of these methods outlined here. And real quick, you have the ability to scan and email a document directly to our fax line. The URL is right here. That's the best way to get documents over to us. And so I know it's harder now to get to a fax machine. So you do have the option to email a document directly to our fax line. That's how you're going to send things to us. If you would still like to use fax, it's the same URL, the same address here, ma_pdp_fax@pcgus.com. And so either one of those two is your optimal way to send documents over to us. The third option is to send a document directly to our customer service email box. That may cause a couple-hour delay in processing, because really what our staff will do is just review it and then move it over to the fax anyway. And so if something's extremely escalated and you need it processed ASAP, you can go ahead and send it to the customer service email box. But I would really urge against utilizing this method frequently. Sending it directly to our fax line is the way to go. And finally, you can good old-fashioned snail mail a W-9 over or a paper invoice to our Medford address. Highly advise against using that method because we typically run into mail delays, and then once the mail arrives, we have to kind of sort it into the correct program and then process it from there. So, quick refresher on how to submit documents there. Important note: so you've set your vendor up. What do you have to do now? You have to submit a paper invoice for the first payment between a specific participant and vendor pairing. And so if you have a participant who's been in the program for a while, but you're just creating a new vendor, the first invoice submission has to be paper. If you have an existing vendor, so if we already have Home Depot Tewksbury in our system, but you're adding a new participant, and that participant's never been paid by Home Depot Tewksbury before, you're going to need a paper invoice. So for the first payment between a unique specific participant and vendor pairing, you need a paper timesheet. All subsequent invoices for that same participant vendor pairing can be done electronically. If you take one thing away from this section, this note should be that. Okay, so we have the W-9 received. You created the provider, the vendor in Portal. Now you're ready to submit the first paper invoice. You can go ahead and submit that first invoice along with the provider's W-9 if you'd like. We'll process them both and get the invoice entered at the same time. Paper invoices are located on publicpartnerships.com, and you can fill them out electronically and return to us via one of the methods we just outlined, or you can print it out, handwrite, scan it back in, and return it to us. This is what the paper invoice looks like. You're going to want to make sure you fill out the vendor name, that E number that I just referenced. After we created the new profile, an E number was spit out. You're going to want to include that here. That's how we know which profile to go to. Additionally, if you forget that number starting with E, you can go back into Portal, search for that provider using their name, and then it'll give you that. All right. Put in their address, city, state, zip, that tax ID number that we just referenced. If you want the payment sent somewhere other than the address on file for that provider, you're going to check off this box and then put the address, city, state, zip you'd like the payment remitted to. And again, we need, in addition to a provider number, we need a participant ID for every payment that goes out the door. And you're going to fill that in here. All right. The section down here, you're going to fill out what the purchase is for, the date, the service code, the dollar amount, and then the quantity. So if you're purchasing 3 ebooks, you can either separate those out into 3 unique lines, or just put it all on one line, lump the dollar amount together, and put quantity 3. So I'm going to go through now how to confirm whether you're ready to submit an electronic invoice, or how to confirm whether you still need to submit that first paper invoice. Any questions thus far? All right. Feel free to speak up. We are on slide 24 now for those following along. And again, I'm going to switch over to the web portal page so that you can see in real time how to actually confirm whether you're ready to submit an e-invoice. So I think I made this out to be a bit more preamble than necessary. In summation, really what you need is a W-9, just create this profile that we went through, and then submit that paper invoice. Those are really the only 3 steps, and so it is fairly painless to get an invoice payment out. We are really pushing towards utilizing electronic invoice, and so I'm now going to demonstrate how you actually are going to go ahead and submit one of those through. But before that, I want to show you how you can confirm on your own whether a paper invoice has previously been submitted, or if you still need to go through that process. So the first step, and again, we're on slide 24 now for those following along. You're going to go to participant search. And what happens when you send in that first paper invoice and W-9 is our team will go ahead and associate the participant listed on the invoice with the new vendor. And so that's how our system recognizes, okay, Home Depot, Tewksbury, and Sally are linked up. We know that they're approved for payment. You can go ahead and submit through. And so just to take that piece off your plate of having to associate a participant to a new vendor, when you send in that initial invoice form that we just looked at on the slide, our team will do that association on your behalf. And so you're going to go ahead and search for the participant for which the payment is coming out of their budget. You're going to go into participant profile, associated providers, and you're going to take a look. And so I'm using this participant as an example. We're not going to use that fake agency I just created, but this is a live example. And so for this participant, you can see, again, we reviewed at the last training, these are the associated providers. You can see 3L Place is an agency, and they've been associated. Okay. You'll see it listed as good to go of no here. This is an important piece. This is the nicely highlighted purple font on slide 25. For these invoice payments, it is okay if this field is listed as no. Okay, that's as simple as I can make it. I'm happy to get into the reasoning behind that at another time, or if we want to take some time and go through it now. But rule of thumb, if you're submitting for a vendor, it's okay for this to be listed as no. That's just because if an agency is providing direct supports, so hourly services, they need that additional paperwork that I referenced earlier. So you need a Form A, Form B. I'll get into what those entail in part 3, but you need much less paperwork for an invoice. So don't be dissuaded if this is listed as no. All you have to do to confirm whether you're all set to submit electronically is click Services. And you can see 5300p. This is checked off. It has an actual desired rate of 1. And by clicking on this rate here, you can see the history, any updated or increased rates. So This provider was associated to the participant with a rate of 1 for this service. For some reason, it was not continuous, but you can see the start date of 7/1, end date 6/30/21. We're all set. If I'm submitting an invoice for today's date, it falls within one of these approved ranges, I'm good to go. If you either do not see the vendor listed here, or if you see the vendor listed, but without the service listed and a rate, you know you still have to submit a paper invoice. Okay? So if I'm trying to submit for Home Depot, I can't see them here. I know that I need to still send in a paper invoice so that PPL can associate Home Depot with this participant. I'm going back to the slide deck for this recap. Slide 27 for those following along. This is a little grid I put together in hopes to clarify the required pieces of paperwork as you're going through submitting a vendor invoice. So top left quadrant here, if you have a brand new vendor who's not in our system, you have a new participant, you have to do all the steps that I just outlined. So print a W-9 for the vendor, make sure you authorize the services in the participant's budget because they're new, and then submit a paper invoice for the first payment. We will associate them and establish the rate like we just reviewed. If you have a new vendor, so they're not in the system yet, but you have a participant who's been in the program for a while, you still need a W-9 because it's a new vendor. You still need to submit a paper invoice for the first time because it's a brand new relationship. So this participant has never been paid by this new vendor has not been paid by this new participant. So we do not have them associated in our system. So you really have to go through that same W-9 paper invoice process. If you have a vendor that's already in our system, so I know we have a bunch of Lowe's, like the hardware store. We have a bunch of different locations set up in our system already. So let's say you're enrolling a new participant, Sally. She comes over from Meditech. You're thinking, great, let's get her the goods that she needs. You search in Portal and you're searching for the Home Depot or Lowe's that's closest to her location. You find that there's the Home Depot in Tewksbury already exists in our system. They've already sent in a W-9. That's great. You can bypass creating the profile. You can bypass sending in the W-9. However, since it's a new relationship, Sally has not received a good on behalf of Home Depot Tewksbury. You still need to submit that paper invoice for the first time. If you have Home Depot Tewksbury and you have Sally, they've both been in the program for a while. Sally has made a purchase from Home Depot in the past. You're going to see that rate established. The vendor is associated in Portal that, like we just reviewed. You're all set to start using e-invoice. Feel free to chime up with any questions. The next slide is actually going to be showing you how to submit that invoice. I know historically there's been some confusion about what is required to get someone set up, and I felt it was important to go through that detail that we just did, just to level set. And so, thanks for working through that.
Hi, this is Amy. I had a question about tax implications for
Hi, Amy.
you're sorry, I have an echo. Should I check? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay, Amy.
Okay. Somebody told me, and this has been a very long time since they said it, but a parent listed themselves as an independent contractor, and then they got some sort of a tax form stating, or some sort of a tax form related to the reimbursement. Was that just a one-time mistake? Or so we were told at the time it was better to use the participant for the reimbursement.
Yeah, Amy, that's a good topic. I was planning on going into more detail in the third iteration of this training, but I think with it being fresh in our mind, I'll briefly go into that. So just so everyone knows, at the end of the year, PPL sends out tax forms for all vendors, all providers who have been paid during the past calendar year. So if you are an employee, we send out a W-2, just as you all get W-2s on behalf of DDS, just as I get a W-2 on behalf of PPL. We also send out 1099s. And so essentially the way you can think about that is it's the equivalent W-2 as to employee, as 1099 is to agency and independent contractor. And so you can see there's a multitude of different ways to get a vendor payment out the door. And in some instances, they go to the parent. And so what you would do in that instance is you'd set the parent up as an independent contractor and then go ahead and send a W-9 in. That parent will receive a 1099 for any payment made on their behalf through their profile. So just as Home Depot receives a 1099 for any payment, any invoice payment, if you set a parent up as an independent contractor and then you submit invoices on their behalf, they're going to receive a 1099. The caveat there is, since you all, for the most part, are submitting electronically, you're including receipts with your attachments. And so historically, if you include receipts with a submission indicating that the good has already been purchased and we're simply reimbursing an individual, whether that be the parent or someone else, then we would not generate a 1099. And so to answer Amy's question, if you want a purchase made on behalf of a family and you do not want a 1099 to go out the door to the parent, I recommend setting the participant up as a provider so that they can receive the reimbursement directly to them. Those participant provider types, so if you recall the 4 different provider types: employee, independent contractor, agency, participant. Participant provider types do not receive a 1099 at the end of the year. Amy, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's get to the meat of this thing here. So I'll switch back to Portal, show you guys how to actually submit. Man, it feels like I've been teasing this for 30 minutes. Okay, so slide 29 for those following along. So Home Depot, Tewksbury, you set them up. You sent in a W-9. You sent in a paper invoice form on behalf of Sally. Payment went out the door 3 months ago. Sally now needs another item from Home Depot, Tewksbury. You're thinking, great, I don't have to deal with the W-9. I don't have to deal with creating the profile. I don't even have to deal with sending in a paper invoice form. I can submit electronically. So when you log in as a broker, this is what your screen looks like. You're going to click the Invoice tab. You're already brought to the Create Invoice sub-tab here. You're going to search for the provider vendor ID. And so I keep using Home Depot, but I'm going to use 3L Place for this example. You're going to select here. And the bottom of the screen will open up. So you'll be able to select a participant. If 3L Place is associated to more than one participant, more than one will show here. For this case, they're only associated to this one individual. You're going to put the date of service. So let's say you made a purchase on November 5th. Enter that here. Select the service, 5300p. If when you created the vendor profile, you selected more than one service and the participant was authorized for more than one service, multiple would show up here, but we only have one in this case. You can see the rate is automatically populated for you as 1 there. You're going to want to leave that alone unless you're submitting for a specific transportation invoice, but I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty at this point. So for the vast majority of invoice payments, you're going to leave that rate as 1. Units field is the dollar amount for that invoice. So let's say $45. This attachments piece is crucial. You need to attach your DDS cover form. If you have any receipts to go along with the purchase, you're going to want to attach that file as well. And then a copy of the paper invoice form if necessary. And so how you're going to do that is simply select choose file. It's going to bring you to your computer. You can see the test PDF here is showing up. You must click upload files here. And then it downloads it into our system, okay? Final step, check off the terms and conditions. That's essentially saying you're not falsifying any information. And you can go ahead and click this submit button here. Line successfully submitted. So that's good news. It came over to our system. It's ready to be paid out. It's good to go. If you did not include an attachment, or if you put more units than are available in the budget, it's going to give you an error message here. And so you'll know that you'll need to correct something before you're able to submit it through. So we just went through slides 29 through 33 for those following along. Put together a quick FAQ on the invoice submission process, slide 34. We'll pull it up on the screen here. If you attach the wrong invoice, so you realize, oops, I put the wrong attachment in that electronic invoice field, that's fine. You can go back, search for the invoice, remove the attachment, and add a new one. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. If you entered the wrong amount and you submitted it through, you can change the dollar amount before it's made good to pay. However, if you submit it and you leave it there for 2 days and you realize, oh shoot, that dollar amount's incorrect, but PPL system already made it good to pay, you can go ahead and delete the invoice before it pays out so you can resubmit. You need to submit a paper invoice for the first submission of each new unique participant vendor association. You can submit for non-waiver services through e-invoice, so those services listed at the bottom of the service matrix, anything with a unit. And transportation codes, you can submit for the majority of them through e-invoice, but 5197 requires a paper form. All right, before we move on to timesheets, questions on invoices? While we're on the topic of invoices, I'm going to go ahead and just show you how you can monitor either pending invoices, in-process invoices, or paid invoices. So skipping around a bit here, but I would like to direct you to slide 52. It's called invoice monitoring. And so you get a question from a vendor. They're wondering, did you submit an invoice on my behalf? Why haven't I received payment yet? Or you receive a question from the participant or family wondering when a check is going to go out to Home Depot. What you're going to go ahead and do is, again, navigate to this Invoice tab. Click Search Invoice Status. And from this screen, you can pull up all invoices that have been paid across the entirety of your caseload. All right, so if you have a 10, that would be nice, a 10 participant caseload, you'll be able to search for any invoice submitted on behalf of any of those 10 participants. You have these filters here. Let's say you know the provider ID in question. So Home Depot calls, why didn't I get paid? Your first step should be, let me check portal, let me check to ensure a check went out the door. And so using any one of these filters, I'm going to go ahead and use provider ID for this case. You can search any historical invoices. All right, you can see a list of invoices submitted on behalf of this participant here, or on behalf of this provider here, excuse me. So you can see an invoice went out on October 9th. It was paid. Check number is 84178 in case you need that for reference. This is the dollar amount. And you can go in to further detail by clicking the details button here. You can see the participant that it was made on behalf of, as well as the service code and the date that it was submitted. So that's how you're going to go about monitoring to see which invoices have been paid, which invoices are in process. And so again, you may have seen invoices with statuses other than paid. So this invoice happened to be denied for one reason or another. All right, and you should not be surprised by that denial, because for the most part, either you're denying it yourself or you're requesting PPL to do so. In process means you've just submitted it through and you're waiting for PPL system to process it into good to pay. You can also see pending invoices. So if you have an invoice listed as pending here, you can go into the details and it'll explain why. Okay, that finishes the invoice discussion. Timesheets are next. Questions on invoices? Last call. All right, so we have about half an hour left. I think we're moving at a pretty good pace. So invoices are submitted on behalf of vendors. They can be submitted on behalf of participants themselves. They can be submitted on behalf of contractors who may be a parent and just receiving goods and service type reimbursements. Timesheets are for employees, independent contractors, and agencies who are providing hourly services. And these are submitted on a 2-week basis. So there's 3 options for submission. You can submit and approve directly in the web portal. I'll show you how to do that. You can submit through our Time for Care mobile app. Or you can submit online, save the timesheet, and then you can print out the paper ones. Really don't recommend option 3. I think 1 or 2 is really going to be your best bet. So do it either directly in portal or on the mobile app. Paper timesheets are still an option, but I highly advise against those where possible. Those of you who have been around and heard me do these before have heard the spiel before, so won't get too far into it. All right, so we are now, I'm going to switch back over to Portal. So how do I get my participant and their worker set up to submit electronic timesheets? You're going to, the same way that you set up a username and password for yourselves as brokers, you're going to do for participants and providers. Participants and providers each need their own unique ID that is correlated with their specific participant profile for participants and provider profiles for providers. So again, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but sign up, select Massachusetts, PDP, and if you're a participant, select that. If you're a provider, select provider. And it's going to ask you for your last name, your social, and your mailing zip code. These are items of info that are contained in Portal. So whatever is included in their web portal profile, you're going to include here. Click Next. It'll spit out a username and password, which you're going to use to log in. Simple as that. All right, so we have our username and password. I'm on slide 40 now. So how does a provider go ahead and submit their time electronically? Once you have a username and password, you can begin submitting electronically right off the bat. So it's not like an invoice where you need to submit a paper one first. You can just go ahead right off the bat, submit electronically for your timesheets. So this is what it looks like from a provider's perspective. I know a few folks have expressed interest in seeing this. So I'm a provider. This is what Portal looks like to me. For our purposes, we're already brought to the correct place, timesheets. You're going to click Create Timesheet. And again, each provider has their own unique username and password. So they only have access to their specific info. They only have access to submit for timesheets for participants that they are associated with. So you're going to select the participant you want to create a timesheet for. Again, if this provider happened to work for more than one individual, they'd show here. Select the one that you'd like to submit the time for. Select any date within the 2-week time period. So as I referenced earlier, payroll periods run on a 2-week cycle. So let's say I want to submit for dates around October 21st. So select any date. Portal is automatically going to generate a timesheet for that 2-week period. So even though I selected 10/21, this outlines the entirety of the 2-week period on your behalf already. So with a paper timesheet, you need to make sure that you write the exact 2-week start and end period accurately, or it's going to be denied. With electronic invoice like this, it eliminates that room for error. So I worked on the 19th. I provided individualized day support. I'm simply going to put my time in and my time out. If you have more than one shift in a day, you're going to click there are more hours, and it'll open up a second field here. So I only worked one day this week. I'm going to go ahead and click next. All right, so I made an error, and Portal stopped me from even submitting it. I said that I started at 10 a.m. and I left at 8 a.m. That's not possible. So you're going to get the error message. You're going to correct it right off the bat here. Easy correction. Whoops, I meant to put noon. Fantastic. Go ahead, click next. Again, that's in contrast with a paper timesheet, where if you accidentally fudge the hours, then you're going to have to wait for our team to deny it and then contact either you or the participant themselves to resubmit. So electronic timesheet, much faster turnaround. You get that real-time feedback. All right, so I'm all set. I'm going to go ahead and submit the timesheet. Your timesheet has been created and submitted to the participant for approval. Great. You also may have noticed the option to save your work. For providers who have a hard time remembering when they worked, you can go ahead, log your hours on a daily basis, save it until the end of the 2-week period, and then submit it through. All right. So that's what it looks like from a provider perspective when submitting an electronic timesheet. It's important that both the provider and the participant or employer are both utilizing electronic timesheet, because if not, the provider is going to be submitting and they're not going to be getting paid because the participant or employer does not approve them. So participants or employers need to approve timesheets on a biweekly basis at least in order to make sure payment goes out consistently. So I just logged in as a participant now. So we are on slide 45. This is what it looks like for every participant that logs in. You're automatically brought to the timesheet list. You're automatically brought to a list of timesheets that have been submitted that are awaiting your approval. So you can see the timesheet status is listed as submitted here. You're going to go ahead if you'd like to. There's not much reason to view the timesheet. If you're just going to approve or reject it, you're going to click Approve, Reject. All right, timesheet, everything looks good. Those are accurate hours, approved. Once you approve it, it's going to go into PPL system and eventually make its way to good to pay and be paid out on the next Friday. You can also reject the timesheet. If you reject the timesheet, you're going to want to make sure you reach out to the provider and say, hey, I rejected it for this reason. Can you please resubmit? Typically, our direct service workers have that level of communication, and so it's a fairly easy conversation. If for some reason the communication is lacking, when the participant or employer, so as we are here, when they reject a timesheet, the provider will get an email letting them know that they did so. You can see reasons here. You can select one if you want, but PPL doesn't track these.
Eric, can I ask a question?
Sure, Beth.
Is there a difference between an employee and an independent contractor as far as submitting time?
Good question. No.
Okay.
So if you're an independent contractor or an employee or an agency submitting a timesheet, it's going to look the exact same for all of them. So no difference in provider type. Yep. And so from your all points of view, similar to how you're tracking historical invoices, timesheets are even, I would say, more pressing because they typically are submitted on a more regular basis. And so if you just look at my screen, I'm logging in as a support broker. So this is what you'll all see. I'm on slide 51 at the moment. So you get a call from a provider who works for a participant in your caseload. They say, I haven't been paid in a month. You're shocked. You want to figure out why. First spot you're going to go to is this page. You're going to click Timesheet List. And again, similar to invoices, you'll be able to see every timesheet submitted for every participant in your caseload. So submitted timesheets, they already show up here. You'll know I need to push that employer to approve this timesheet. That's simply the reason that it's held up, is the participant or employer forgot. If you want to look at a historical timesheet, if you want to see whether something was paid out. By the way, you also have the option to approve or reject timesheets with your view as a support broker. So if you click Approve, Reject here, you can go in and approve or reject submitted timesheets yourself. But let's say you're interested in seeing when a timesheet was paid out. And so you're going to either search with the participant ID, or you can search with the provider first and last name, or the timesheet date range. So let's say we're looking for this specific individual. So again, you're looking for paid timesheets on behalf of this provider. You'll be able to see them down here, all right? So with an eye on time, I am going to plow ahead and just quickly review our Time for Care mobile app. So we're on slide 48 and 49 now. There's a Time for Care mobile app quick guide on our website, www.publicpartnerships.com. It also should have been sent out by your regional manager earlier today. But essentially, you can download the app. Again, it's called Time for Care, Apple or Android, either one, just how you download any other app. You log in to Time for Care using the same exact username and password you would for Portal. So if you don't already have one, you can also sign up through the app. If you already have one, just go ahead, log in. This menu here, you can see your existing hours, pay periods, any notifications. So a lot of the similar detail you'd be able to see by logging into Portal and looking at timesheets that way. You can submit time. Again, you select the participant, what service, the date, time, and you can just click add time. It's quite straightforward and intuitive. It'll bring you screen by screen, tell you exactly what you need to do. You can submit your timesheet through the app as well. You can see this little orange submit timesheet action button right here. And again, the employer/participant will also need to approve the timesheet on the app or in Portal. So when we say Time for Care is integrated with our Portal, that means you can do any action you can do in Portal, you can do it on the Time for Care app, and it will reflect in Portal just as if you did it either way. So whichever method you want to use to submit and approve time, it's the end result is the same. All right, and so I'd recommend reviewing this and making this an option for new participants that you're enrolling, or existing participants that may have experienced some timesheet issues recently. The mobile app is a good alternative. Okay, 15 minutes left here. So we are on the last section of what we were hoping to cover today, and that is the PEND report. What is the PEND report, Eric? A PEND report will show you every timesheet that is currently pending. So there's an issue and it couldn't be paid out for one reason or another, whether it be an invoice or a timesheet, for every participant in your caseload. And so this PEND report is something you really should be running on a regular basis so that you can see whether actions required on your end to clear what we call a PEND and ensure payment goes out the door. So I outlined in slides 54 through 55 how to run the report. You're going to click reporting. Again, I'm logged in as a support broker. Click reporting. All right, so it's making me log in again. Click PEND report right here. Click run report. And I know nothing's gonna pull up here because Jess does not have any pending timesheets on her caseload. No new records found. Fantastic. You don't have any timesheets or invoices that require action on your end. However, for the sake of this training, I pulled a PEND report just this morning for the entirety of the state. All right. So this is what the PEND report will look like when you pull it. I removed the participant name and an employee name for the sake of privacy. So we're on slide 56 now. So you pull this report, you see all this information, right? You have the employee number, the participant number, their names will be included as well. You'll see the service code. So again, we reviewed the service matrix to outline these. You'll see this penned message. This is really the key. So why the heck is this timesheet? Why the heck is this invoice not going through? This is the reason why. Timesheet number, you'll need this when searching in Portal. You'll see the service date. If it's an hourly service, you'll see the in time and the out time. Payroll control type. If you see requisition, that means it's an invoice. If you see paid hour, that means it's a timesheet. And then you can see the service facilitator name and ID here. The region is included as well, but if you're a broker or area office admin logging in, you'll just see folks in your specific caseload or across the entirety of your area office. So you're going to pull this report, and what I find to be the easiest way to monitor these and digest this report is sorting by participant ID, which I've already done, and then splitting out each unique each unique pended timesheets per participant. So you can see this participant ID has 4 pens here. This participant has 1. This participant has however many are here. You want to split those out so you have an easier time viewing what's going on here. So the screenshots are included in slide 56, but essentially you're going to want to subtotal the report. So at each change in client number or participant number, you're going to want to put a little page break there, okay? Click OK. And this splits it up nicely for you so you can see on a participant by participant basis what the timesheets look like and why they're pending. So you have yourself a nice view here, and you now need to kind of dig into how can I alleviate these pens? How do I get something paid out? We put together, and again, this should have been in the email you received earlier. You should have all the information in this report that you need in order to research why something's pending by using Portal. So you're going to toggle between this report and then Portal to do your research. We put together a list of all the pend rules in our system. So duplicate entry, there's an overlapping timesheet, there's no pay rate established. We put this comprehensive list together with a description of what the pend message means, whether there's action required on your end or on the provider's end, and then specific instructions on how to clear that pend. So I really recommend using this this pend rules cheat sheet as you're going through the report. I listed out some of the most frequent pens that we see in the slide deck from slide 57 through 63. And so we'll quickly review those now. So the first item is, let's say you have an overlapping timesheet. And so right here is a good example. So this participant ID, this timesheet they submitted, our system is showing, hey, look, you indicated that you worked from 5 to 6:30 on this date. However, it looks like you already have a paid timesheet in our system for similar hours. And so what you'd want to do is take this timesheet ID, go to that timesheet list tab, and you can use that in that manner. I guess for this specific example, you'd want to search for the employee. All right. So it would have been a paid timesheet. Sorry, I'm in Jess's view. So this is a statewide report, hence why they might not show up here. So what you'd want to do with the service overlap, you'd really just want to research, is it an actual approved overlap? So did this participant, do they have authorization to receive care from multiple providers at the same time? And so you'd want to search for timesheets submitted on behalf of this participant or this provider on these dates of service, and then you'd email PPL to go ahead and override the pen. Those are fairly frequent. If you see a message, I'm on slide 59 now. If there's an issue with the authorization, and so we don't have many at the moment, which is good. Let's say worked units exceed the units remaining on the auth. That would indicate that you need to add money to the budget or deny this invoice because they're overspending. And so for this timesheet ID, you'd want to take a look at this participant's budget, make sure that there's money allocated for that code for that service date. We'll also see pens that deal with a Form A or Form B, and those are the employment agreements and the rate forms. And so if you see pay rate cannot be 0 or bill rate cannot be 0, you'll know that we are most likely missing a Form A or B, and you'll need to submit that into us. This specific message is indicating that the agreement Form A date, so the employment agreement date was signed on August 19th. They were trying to submit for a date worked on August 17th. You're not allowed to submit for time before you signed your employment agreement, and so that's why this is pending. So it would either be you all going in and denying the timesheet in portal or asking us to do so, or submitting a new Form A date that's backdated prior to 8/17. Slide 61. From time to time, we will see a pen message that says employee of an invalid class code for this service. Typically what that means is you're an independent contractor trying to submit for an employee service code. And so it may be a simple case of, oops, I submitted under my independent contractor ID. I should have used my employee ID. You just go ahead and deny the timesheet that exists and then resubmit. Sometimes we will see pens for authorizations, and so amount exceeds the budgeted amount. That means you need to add money to this service code in this participant's budget. Or if you see a message that says consumer is not authorized for this service, you'll again want to look into the budget and see, do I have an authorization for this date range? Is it approved? Is there money in there? And typically you'll be able to alleviate the issue through that manner. Finally, individuals cannot start working before they have their CORI approved. And so if they try and submit a timesheet for a date before their CORI date was approved, their criminal background check, it's going to pend. Now, newly, you will see national background check pens because, as we know, all providers require a fingerprint check in order to be good to go and paid. And so you may start seeing pen messages surrounding someone trying to submit a timesheet for dates before their fingerprint was approved. Okay, so last slide, again, please refer to that MAPDP pen rules cheat sheet that I had pulled up here. It really is helpful in letting you know, is there action that I need to take? And then how do I go ahead and clear these pens? So I again recommend running that on a regular basis, setting up some kind of process with either your area office manager or yourself.